The last day of death row, inmate John Balentine. Why did he choose death row over life in prison? Hello friends. Tonight we revisit a chilling case that unfolded in the quiet streets of Amarillo, Texas. Imagine a man with a past full of trouble, standing just steps away from the scene of a crime in the middle of the night, questioned by police, searched, and then released back into the darkness. Hours later, the city would awaken to a discovery that shocked the community and haunted investigators for years. This is the story of John Balentine, a man whose final days on Texas death row were marked by unanswered questions, including one mystery that still lingers. What happened to the missing weapon? His case is more than a story of crime. It is a haunting reflection on choices, fate, and justice. Stay with us as we uncover his last 24 hours inside the walls of Texas death row. And don't forget to subscribe to Death Watch Diaries for more prison documentary stories. John Balentine's early years were marked by instability. Growing up in Newport, Arkansas, he entered the justice system as a teenager, earning convictions for burglary, assault, and robbery. His record showed a pattern of poor decisions and brushes with authority, but it also revealed a man who, despite repeated chances, seemed unable to step away from chaos. By his late 20s, he was already known as someone who could not outrun his own history. When he later relocated to Texas, he seemed to carry those burdens with him, like shadows that refused to fade. In Amarillo, John began dating a young woman named Misty Kaler. For a short while, life appeared to stabilize. They shared a home on Southeast 17th Avenue, a modest residence where Misty's younger brother, 17-year-old Mark, also lived. The arrangement, however, was fragile. Tension grew between John and Mark, fueled by arguments over how John treated Misty. At one point, the dispute escalated into a fight, and John was forced to leave the house. From that moment, anger and suspicion seemed to take root in his mind. John later claimed that Mark had threatened him, even suggesting harm against his family, though investigators never confirmed such claims. Still, in John's mind, the seeds of resentment and fear had been planted. That brings us to the night of January 21st, 1998, a night that would define everything. After midnight, John returned to the Kaler home. He entered not through the door, but by crawling under the house and finding a way inside. He carried a .32 caliber pistol, and in his own confession, he later admitted to standing over the sleeping boys inside. At first, the weapon jammed. He slipped outside, unjammed the gun, and fired a test shot into the night sky. That single shot, intended to clear his weapon, became a signal to a neighbor who quickly phoned the Amarillo police. What makes this night so haunting is what happened next. Officer Timothy Harden was dispatched to the neighborhood in response to the gunfire report. Within minutes, he spotted John walking along the street near the house. Harden stopped him, patted him down, and discovered a single bullet in his pocket. John, calm and composed, introduced himself under a false name, John Smith. He told the officer he was walking back from a Walmart, and the encounter seemed ordinary enough. Harden had no legal reason to hold him. Carrying a bullet was not a crime. So, in a twist of fate, the man who would later be named as the prime suspect in the deaths of 3 teenagers was released, just steps away from the scene. Hours later, when daylight broke, the terrible reality came to light. Inside the home on Southeast 17th Avenue, 3 young boys were found lifeless. 17-year-old Mark Edward Kaler, 15-year-old Stephen Watson, and 15-year-old Kai Geyer. They had been sleeping when their lives ended. For the Amarillo community, the discovery was devastating. For the police, the encounter with John Smith just yards away from the crime scene instantly took on new meaning. The suspect they had unknowingly spoken to in the dark was now their prime target. But John had already disappeared. He fled Texas, eventually hiding out in New Mexico. For months, he evaded capture, slipping through the cracks while Amarillo police worked to piece together the events of that night. Then, 6 months later, his luck ran out. Driving a car with a broken taillight in Houston, John was pulled over by officers. He once again tried to lie about his identity, but this time his deception collapsed. The officer quickly discovered that he was a wanted man, arrested and confronted with the evidence. John confessed to everything. He was brought back to Amarillo to face trial. The proceedings that followed highlighted both the brutality of the act and the puzzling decisions John made along the way. Prosecutors offered him a plea bargain that would have spared him the death penalty in exchange for a life sentence without parole. Many defendants in his position might have accepted, but John refused. He told his lawyers that life in the general prison population was more dangerous than death row. To him, the isolation of a death row cell felt safer than living among the larger prison community. In choosing the certainty of a death sentence over the possibility of living, John revealed a mindset that baffled even those representing him. As his appeals wound through the courts, questions about his case lingered. Perhaps the most striking was the missing weapon. Despite his confession, the pistol used in the crime was never recovered. Some speculated that after his encounter with Officer Hardin, John returned to the house and retrieved the gun before disposing of it in New Mexico. Others wondered if it had been hidden so well that it would never resurface. The absence of the weapon added a layer of mystery that would remain unsolved. On death row, John lived out the years in the Polunsky unit in Livingston, Texas. There, like many others awaiting execution, his life became one of confinement and waiting. The sterile cell, the heavy silence of the unit, and the slow ticking of time framed his existence. Inmates often describe death row as a place where every day feels the same until the end draws near. For John, February 8, 2023, became that final date on the calendar. As the day approached, the rituals that defined the last 24 hours unfolded. He was moved to a holding cell near the Huntsville death chamber. The conversations grew heavier, his thoughts shifting between what had been and what was about to come. In those final hours, inmates are given choices: a last meal, time for spiritual reflection, or the chance to speak final words. For John, the silence surrounding his case suggested that the weight of his decisions and the lives lost in Amarillo were never far from his mind. Witnesses prepared to gather behind the glass as the appointed hour drew near. For the families of the victims, this was the closing of a chapter that had stretched on for decades. For John, it was the end of a journey that began with restless youth and ended under the watchful eyes of the state of Texas. The execution chamber, with its stark walls and heavy straps, became the final stage for a man who once thought death row offered more safety than life behind bars. For the families of the young lives lost in Amarillo, the execution marked a solemn chapter of closure, though no sentence can ever erase their grief. For observers, one haunting question remains: what truly drove John to reject life in prison and accept death row as the safer option? And what became of the missing weapon that vanished into the shadows? These mysteries linger long after his final breath. Dear friends, stories like this remind us how fragile life and justice can be. Stay with us, share your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe to Death Watch Diaries for more prison documentary stories.